Hey everyone, I'm a 27-year-old guy and I'm here to share a story about my brother Lucas, who's 30, and his fiancée Emma, 28. It's safe to say, things have gotten pretty wild. I don't think I would have ever expected to be here, supporting what's now starting to feel like a twisted revenge plot, but here I am. For some background, Lucas and Emma have been together for 5 years, and honestly, from the outside they seemed perfect. Lucas has always been this charming, easygoing guy, and Emma as well, she's pretty much the opposite. She's organized, patient, and practical. I thought they balanced each other out. I was really close to Lucas growing up, and even though we don't hang out as much these days, we've stayed in touch. So when Lucas announced he was proposing, I was happy for him. He and Emma had been together long enough, and it just seemed like the right move. Everyone in the family felt the same, my parents were excited, and so was Emma's family. They're both great people, so no one had any reason to think they weren't happy. But looking back, I realize now that Lucas was already showing signs of, detachment, I guess. A few months after they got engaged, things started to change. Lucas was more distant, barely spent time with Emma, and started coming up with excuses to stay out late. I assumed it was just pre-wedding stress. People get tense, right? But this was different. Lucas would make snide comments to Emma that just felt wrong, almost dismissive. And even though she didn't show it, I could tell Emma was starting to feel the strain. Then one evening, I got a text from Emma asking if we could meet up. It felt odd because while we've always been friendly, we weren't exactly close. I met her at this quiet little cafe, and the moment I saw her, I knew something was off. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days. She thanked me for meeting her, then went straight into it. Turns out Lucas had been cheating on her for 6 months. Now, I've heard my share of bad relationship stories, but this one hit hard. I mean, I always thought Lucas was a good guy, but according to Emma, he'd been seeing a woman from work. Apparently, this other woman was someone Lucas spent a lot of time with at his office, someone he'd slowly gotten closer to. Emma didn't know every detail, but what she did know was enough. She'd seen messages, photos, enough to confirm the affair. Emma told me she'd been planning to leave him. She'd even thought about packing up her things and moving out without a word, but something changed. She decided she couldn't just let him get away with it, especially not after she'd been by his side through so much. And here's the kicker. Lucas has been pretty dependent on her financially. He's been trying to launch a startup for the last year, and it's barely scraping by. He was counting on her income to keep things steady, and I could tell that realization fueled her anger. So Emma decided she'd stay. Not because she wanted to work things out, but because she wanted to give him a taste of his own medicine. Her plan? Go through with the wedding, let Lucas believe she's completely committed, and then turn the tables on him. She wanted to see him squirm, make him feel secure only to pull the rug out from under him when he least expected it. I could barely wrap my head around what she was saying, but I couldn't deny it. Her plan was, well, it was brilliant. Ruthless, but brilliant. After that, things moved fast. Lucas had no idea that Emma knew about the affair. She started playing the perfect fiancé, making Lucas feel like she was all in for their future. And slowly, he started acting better. I noticed he was around more often, treating her with a level of respect that had been missing for months. He'd bring her flowers, plan little dates, and even started talking about their future with enthusiasm. It was like he was trying to make up for something. Guilt? Maybe? Emma would fill me in occasionally. I started to see her as a bit of an ally. The more she told me about her plan, the more I started to root for her. I never would have believed I'd be here, helping my brother's fiancée get revenge on him. But something about Lucas's behavior made me lose all sympathy for him. He had everything he could ask for with Emma, and he'd just thrown it away. At the engagement party, Lucas put on a show. He was charming, affectionate, and for lack of a better word, fake. I watched Emma playing along, laughing and smiling as though everything was perfect. But there was this quiet confidence about her that told me she knew exactly what she was doing. She'd look at me every so often with this knowing smile, and I'd feel this mix of excitement and nervousness. Was she really going to pull this off? When it was her turn to give a toast, she stood up and looked right at Lucas. She spoke about love, loyalty, and trust in a way that made my skin crawl. The words were perfect, but the meaning was clear. She was telling him, in front of everyone, that she knew without actually saying it. And Lucas? He just sat there, oblivious, eating up every word. After that night, I realized I was in too deep. Emma had me in on her plan, and I didn't want to stop her. Lucas had made his bed, and now he was going to have to lie in it. This was only the beginning, and something told me things were about to get very interesting. Update 1. As the wedding planning got underway, Emma threw herself into every detail. At first, Lucas was just relieved that she was so committed. It looked like she'd gone back to the sweet, devoted fiancé he'd known before things got rocky. And, let's just say, Emma played her role perfectly. Lucas, meanwhile, started acting like he was bending over backward to make things right with Emma. He'd bring her little surprises, like her favorite coffee or a small bouquet of flowers, looking hopeful, as if to say, see, I'm being a good fiancé. He didn't know she already knew about his double life. Emma would give me updates, and every time it sounded like Lucas's guilt was eating him up, though he'd never admit it. He was trying to be a better guy without understanding that he was only making it easier for her to go through with her plan. One evening, I met up with Emma to discuss what was next. She had been researching all sorts of wedding themes, and she wanted something that looked timeless and romantic but not too over the top. She knew Lucas liked smaller, intimate gatherings, and she planned everything to match his taste perfectly. Lucas fell for it completely. Every time Emma showed him a new idea or detail she'd planned, he looked flattered, like he couldn't believe he'd found someone who cared so much. While Emma kept making Lucas feel like he was the center of her world, she started asking for little things here and there. Nothing that would seem strange, just more involvement from him. She asked him to start a project for the wedding, a video montage of their best moments together. She suggested he include family photos, memories of their travels, and some goofy videos from when they were first dating. Lucas agreed, maybe thinking it was his chance to prove to her and himself that he was all in. Every time I saw him working on that montage, he looked more and more invested, like he was building his own case for forgiveness without even realizing it. As all this was unfolding, I became Emma's silent partner in this revenge scheme. I didn't realize how much I'd be drawn into it. Watching Lucas unknowingly help plan his own downfall was addictive in a strange way. It was like I couldn't look away, even if a part of me felt a little guilty. But every time I saw Lucas treating Emma like she was lucky to have him, the guilt faded. Things picked up speed when Emma asked me to go with her dress shopping. She tried on a few over-the-top options first, pretending she was the happy bride-to-be, and I did my best to play the part of the supportive brother-in-law. At one point, she even tried on this huge princess-style dress, and I couldn't help but laugh. She looked at me with this mischievous grin, clearly enjoying the performance. After some dramatic dress fittings, she finally chose something classic and simple, exactly the kind of thing Lucas would love. A few days later, we had a family gathering, and Lucas thought it would be a good chance for him to show everyone how much he adored Emma. He planned a little toast, trying to sound like the perfect partner. But Emma, always one step ahead, turned it around on him. She stood up, thanked him for being her rock through everything, and talked about how lucky she was to marry someone so dedicated and trustworthy. Lucas's face went red, and I could see the hint of panic in his eyes. She knew exactly what she was doing, and she enjoyed every second of it. Watching her deliver that toast, I felt like I was seeing a different side of her. She wasn't just trying to hurt Lucas, she was savoring every moment of it, and she was good at it. The family had no idea, they just thought it was a sweet toast, a glimpse into what looked like a happy relationship. And Lucas, clueless as ever, assumed it was all genuine. He looked at her like he couldn't believe she'd forgiven him for everything he'd put her through. He had no idea that was only a small taste of what was to come. At one point during the night, Emma dropped a subtle hint, a comment only Lucas would catch. She mentioned something about loyalty, and Lucas froze for a second. It was just enough to make him squirm, and I caught her smirking as she watched him get uncomfortable. She knew how to push his buttons without making anyone else suspicious, which was almost impressive. I noticed other family members starting to pick up on Lucas's strange behavior too. One of our cousins even asked me if Lucas was okay, because he looked like he was on edge all night. I just shrugged, saying it was probably wedding stress, which seemed to satisfy them, but I could tell they were watching him more closely. Emma wasn't the only one who noticed something was off. She just had the advantage of knowing the truth. As the wedding plans continued, the tension between Lucas and Emma only seemed to grow. Lucas tried even harder to be the perfect fiancé, taking her out for spontaneous date nights and leaving little love notes for her. He had no idea that everything he did just gave Emma more to work with. By the end of that week, Emma and I were meeting again. She was almost gleeful as she talked about how well things were going. I could see how much she was looking forward to the next step, the bridal shower. She hinted that things would get interesting then, especially since she had a special guest planned, someone who might make Lucas's stomach drop. She didn't go into details, but I had a pretty good idea who she meant. With the bridal shower approaching, I couldn't help but feel a mix of dread and excitement. I knew things were going to escalate, and Lucas had no clue what was coming. Every day he spent trying to be the good guy just made it all the more satisfying to watch. Update 2. The bridal shower day arrived, and Emma had gone all out to make it picture perfect. She chose a charming venue with soft lighting, floral decorations, and personalized gifts for each guest. Lucas's family, her friends, and even a few of his friends were invited, and everyone dressed up as if they were attending a mini wedding. My job was to help with the setup and keep things running smoothly. Emma had a vision, and I was there to make sure it came to life. Right as the party started, I noticed a new face in the crowd. It didn't take long to realize who it was, Lucas's work friend, the one he'd been secretly seeing. She was dressed to impress, and although she tried to blend in, her presence was hard to miss, especially once I noticed Emma's eyes settle on her for a brief moment. Emma had invited her here, fully aware of who she was. The woman seemed oblivious to Emma's knowledge, though, acting casual and chatting with other guests, including Lucas, who had no idea she'd be here. As the afternoon went on, Emma kept the atmosphere warm and friendly, making everyone feel comfortable. She circulated around the room, chatting and laughing, but there were subtle moments when she'd make eye contact with Lucas's mistress. Each time, her smile would shift ever so slightly, turning colder for just a split second. The mistress noticed these small changes and began looking more and more uneasy, though she didn't say anything. When it was time for speeches, Emma stood up, thanking everyone for being part of her life. She spoke about loyalty, trust, and what it meant to her, sharing stories from her and Lucas's relationship that painted him as the perfect partner. People clapped, but I could tell by the look in her eye and the way she occasionally glanced toward the mistress that she was crafting every word with precision. Lucas, standing off to the side, looked proud, beaming like he was the luckiest guy in the world. After her speech, Emma moved toward the mistress, who'd been trying to avoid her the whole night. Emma gave her a sweet but sharp smile and asked how work was going. The mistress looked caught off guard, mumbling a response. They exchanged a few more words, and I could see the subtle tension building between them. Emma's expression never faltered, but the mistress's face told a different story. She looked like she wanted to vanish, and Lucas, clueless as ever, finally began to sense that something wasn't quite right. As the evening wore on, other guests started picking up on the odd tension between Emma and this friend. A couple of family members even whispered to me, asking if I knew who she was. I shrugged, playing dumb, while internally I was glued to the unfolding drama. Lucas began looking uncomfortable too, though he couldn't pinpoint what was off. He watched Emma, probably wondering why she was acting so strange around his coworker, but he didn't dare bring it up. Toward the end of the event, Emma made another speech. This time, it was just a simple thank you to everyone for their support and a toast to honesty in relationships. Her voice was warm, and she smiled brightly, but her words hit like a hammer. I watched the mistress, who now looked pale, her eyes darting to Lucas, who still seemed lost. Emma had everyone raise their glasses, and while she kept her composure, I saw a glimmer in her eyes as she stared straight at Lucas and his mistress. They were the only ones who would understand the hidden message. Not long after that, the mistress excused herself, claiming she needed to take a call. She disappeared onto the balcony, her phone clutched tightly. Lucas followed her, and they spoke in hushed tones, Lucas looking around occasionally to make sure no one was watching. I could see the guilt and confusion in his eyes. He looked like he was questioning whether Emma knew something. Meanwhile, Emma stayed inside, chatting with family, looking calm and in control. Watching her, I realized she wasn't just confronting Lucas's betrayal, she was slowly turning the screws. As the shower wrapped up, I overheard the mistress telling Lucas that she couldn't keep doing this. She looked close to tears, and Lucas was scrambling to calm her down, looking around to make sure no one could overhear them. She kept asking him if anyone knew about them, and he assured her that no one did, though his face showed doubt. He had no idea that Emma had already won this round, and the mistress was starting to crumble under the pressure. The drive home was silent, with Lucas probably deep in thought, piecing together the subtle hints and tension that filled the evening. Emma, on the other hand, kept her poker face up and seemed unfazed, scrolling on her phone as if nothing had happened. I sat in the back, pretending not to notice, but I knew this was far from over. The next day, I got a message from Emma, saying she had something big planned for the wedding. The bridal shower had only been a taste of what was coming, and she was prepared to take things even further. Lucas was still blissfully unaware, thinking he'd smoothed things over, but from what Emma hinted, the real showdown was yet to come. Things were only just heating up, and I couldn't wait to see how Lucas would handle it once Emma's plan hit full force at the wedding. Update 3. The wedding day arrived with a strange mix of excitement and tension hanging in the air. The venue was beautiful, with flowers everywhere, a white arch covered in greenery, and soft music playing as guests started arriving. Lucas seemed anxious but kept smiling, glancing at his watch and pacing near the entrance. He'd made it this far and looked like he was hoping everything would go smoothly. Emma, on the other hand, was calm and composed, almost serene. She moved through the final preparations effortlessly, taking moments to speak with family and friends and looking every bit the picture-perfect bride. As the ceremony began, the guests fell quiet, and I watched as Lucas took his place at the altar, fidgeting slightly. Emma entered the room, looking radiant in her dress, and walked slowly down the aisle, meeting Lucas's gaze with a soft smile. Everyone was captivated, and Lucas looked at her like he couldn't believe his luck. But I noticed the way his smile faltered just a little when Emma's expression turned slightly colder, just for a second. The vows began, and Lucas went first. He spoke about his love for her, how grateful he was to have her, and even made a few light-hearted jokes that got the guests laughing. Then it was Emma's turn. She took a deep breath and started her vows, but it wasn't what anyone expected. She spoke with love and devotion, but woven into her words were subtle, sharp lines. She talked about loyalty, how trust was the foundation of a strong relationship, and how she valued honesty above everything else. Every sentence seemed perfectly innocent, yet I could see Lucas's expression shifting. He looked increasingly uncomfortable, his eyes darting around as if he wondered if anyone else could see through her words. When Emma finished, there was an awkward pause before the guests clapped. Emma's smile was almost too calm, like she'd rehearsed every word 100 times and enjoyed seeing Lucas squirm. The ceremony concluded, and the guests cheered as Lucas and Emma walked down the aisle together, smiling for the cameras. But I could tell Lucas was rattled, though he tried to brush it off, playing the role of the happy groom. At the reception, Emma kept up her act, mingling with family and laughing with friends, while Lucas stayed close, keeping a wary eye on her. Eventually, it was time for the speeches, and Lucas's friends shared funny stories, and his parents gave a warm speech, clearly proud of their son. When it was Emma's turn, the room went silent. She thanked everyone for coming, expressing her gratitude for everyone's love and support. But then, she added something that shifted the mood entirely. She spoke about how meaningful loyalty was to her, how she'd always strive to be someone her partner could rely on, even when that loyalty wasn't reciprocated. There was a slight murmur among the guests, and Lucas's face drained of color. She didn't name names, didn't give specifics, but her message was clear, especially to Lucas and a few of us who knew the whole story. Lucas glanced at me, clearly panicking, but I kept a straight face. Emma's speech was smooth, controlled, and wrapped up with an ironic smile as she raised her glass, and the guests clinked their glasses, although a few looked puzzled. The mistress, who'd managed to stay mostly in the background, suddenly looked like she wanted to disappear. She'd been trying to blend in, but with Emma's words hanging in the air, she looked increasingly guilty. Lucas's eyes flicked to her briefly, and it was obvious that he was growing more desperate to keep up appearances, though the cracks were beginning to show. After the speeches, Emma stepped aside briefly and left Lucas a small letter. He slipped away to read it, thinking it was a love note or some heartfelt message. Instead, he found a blunt, handwritten confession from Emma. She laid it all out, from discovering his affair to her decision to go through with the wedding, not out of love, but to give him exactly what he deserved. She even added that she'd thought about telling everyone right then and there but decided to let him sweat a little longer. Lucas's face, when he returned, was a shade of pale I'd never seen before. He looked around the room, his gaze landing on Emma, who was chatting with some guests as if nothing was out of the ordinary. He tried to pull her aside, but she just smiled, shrugged, and told him it was too late to change anything now. I watched from a distance, catching glimpses of their exchange, and couldn't help but feel a strange satisfaction. Lucas looked like he was about to break down, clearly realizing the extent of what Emma knew and that he had no way out. As the evening wound down, Lucas tried to keep his composure, but every so often, someone would ask him if he was okay. Noticing his strained expression, he brushed them off, saying he was just tired. Emma, though, wasn't finished. Just as the newlyweds were about to leave for their honeymoon, she pulled Lucas aside and whispered that maybe she'd tell everyone there, at the honeymoon send-off, about his betrayal. The look on his face was priceless. He was trapped, desperate, and for once, unable to charm his way out. The family started noticing his anxiety. My parents asked if he was nervous about the trip, and he just gave a forced laugh, claiming he was fine. But everyone could tell something was off. Emma, on the other hand, kept up her flawless act, thanking everyone and bidding them goodbye with a bright smile. As I watched them drive off, I knew Lucas was in for a miserable honeymoon. He'd be on edge, wondering if Emma would reveal his secret at any moment, knowing he'd finally lost control. And from the way she'd planned everything so far, I doubted she'd go easy on him. This was just the beginning of the fallout, and I knew that whatever happened next would be even more intense. Update 4. The day Lucas and Emma left for their honeymoon, you could practically feel the tension hanging in the air. Lucas looked nervous, barely able to keep up his happy newlywed act. Emma, however, was calm, smiling and waving to the family as they pulled away. She didn't look back, already setting the stage for the next part of her plan. A few hours after they'd left, I got a text from Emma. She let me know her intentions. She planned to reveal everything to Lucas during their trip. From her message, I knew she wasn't going to pull any punches. She wanted him to feel the full weight of what he'd done, and she wasn't going to make it easy for him. She even hinted at a fancy dinner where she'd lay it all out for him. I could picture Lucas sitting there, thinking he was finally in the clear, only to have the rug pulled out from under him. Over the next few days, Emma kept me in the loop. Apparently, Lucas had been trying to get closer to her, constantly checking in and doing everything he could to seem like the loving husband. He'd suggest romantic dinners, late-night strolls on the beach, the whole 9 yards. But Emma brushed him off each time, keeping her distance and letting him know she wasn't falling for his charm. One night, Emma sent me a photo of the dinner set up at a high-end restaurant. The table was beautifully set with candles and roses, the type of scene you'd see in a romantic movie. She texted me just before it began, saying, "This is it." I could only imagine Lucas's face as he thought he was about to have a heartfelt evening with his new wife, only to be met with her revelations. As the dinner went on, Emma filled me in piece by piece. She finally told him everything. The months of planning, the speeches she'd crafted to remind him of his mistakes, and of course the fact that she'd known about his affair all along. Lucas, from what she described, looked like he was about to lose it. He tried to stammer out apologies, grasping at every excuse he could think of, but Emma wasn't moved. She sat there calmly, watching him as he stumbled over his words, desperate to explain himself. Then came the ultimatum. She told him she'd keep things quiet for now, but only if he agreed to her terms. If he didn't, she'd let everyone know the truth, his family included. Lucas was trapped, completely out of options. He tried to bargain with her, but Emma held her ground. She let him know in no uncertain terms that she was done playing nice. When they got back to their hotel room, I got a call from Lucas. He sounded panicked, like he'd just seen a ghost. He asked me if I had any idea about Emma's plan, and I played dumb, telling him I had no clue what he was talking about. He muttered something about a huge misunderstanding and begged me to help him talk to Emma, but I brushed him off. Lucas was scrambling, and it was clear he didn't know what to do. After that, Emma called me, filling me in on the details. Lucas had finally agreed to her terms, but he was a nervous wreck, constantly looking over his shoulder, wondering if she'd tell the family anyway. She said he barely slept, staying up all night, pacing around their hotel room like he was waiting for some kind of explosion. It was exactly what Emma wanted, for him to feel the fear of losing everything, the way he'd made her feel when she first discovered the affair. Meanwhile, back home, our family started noticing something was off. Lucas had been distant with everyone, keeping phone calls brief and barely responding to texts. Our parents asked me if I knew what was going on, but I just shrugged it off, saying he was probably just exhausted from all the wedding chaos. Still, a few family members weren't convinced and kept pressing, wondering why Lucas seemed so tense. When Lucas and Emma returned from the honeymoon, they put on a united front, acting as though nothing had happened. Lucas forced a smile and Emma played her part perfectly, looking every bit the devoted wife. But every so often, when he thought no one was looking, Lucas's smile would slip, revealing the stress he was under. He looked like he was constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop. I decided to have a bit of fun with it and dropped a few hints on Reddit. Without giving away any major details, I wrote a few vague posts about a family wedding with a twist and mentioned how things weren't quite as they seemed with the happy couple. People picked up on it quickly, and the responses poured in, filled with guesses about what might have happened. It was strange, seeing strangers dissecting our family drama, but in a way, it made the whole thing feel even more surreal. A week later, Emma casually mentioned to me that the best part was yet to come. She wasn't finished with Lucas, not by a long shot. She had another plan up her sleeve, something she'd reveal at an upcoming family event. From what she hinted, it sounded like it would be even more intense than anything she'd done so far. Watching all of this unfold, I couldn't help but feel like we were on the brink of something big. Lucas thought he'd managed to hold on to his secrets, but he was walking into another trap, set by Emma, with everyone he cared about watching. I didn't know how it would play out, but one thing was clear: this was far from over. Update 5. The family gathering Emma had planned finally arrived, and she'd gone all out. The setup was as grand as a wedding reception, with elegant decorations, catered food, and a band playing in the corner of the hall. Everyone thought it was a celebration of their new marriage, another reason to toast to Lucas and Emma's happiness. But those of us in the know were waiting for the real reason she'd planned this event. I arrived early, catching sight of Lucas, who was trying his best to look relaxed. But even with his usual charm, he couldn't quite hide the nervous glances or the way he constantly adjusted his tie. He was on edge, and it didn't take a detective to see it. He knew something was coming, he just didn't know when or how. Guests started trickling in, greeting Lucas and Emma, congratulating them again on their marriage. Friends and family members filled the room, each clueless to the hidden tension building under the surface. And then, in the crowd, I spotted someone unexpected: the woman Lucas had been seeing. She lingered near the back, clearly uncomfortable, looking around as if she was unsure why she'd come. I assumed she'd received a direct invite from Emma. Classic Emma move. As everyone settled, Emma began to make her rounds, greeting guests warmly and offering Lucas small, affectionate gestures here and there, which made him visibly relax. But there was something else too. Whenever she glanced at the mistress in the back of the room, her smile sharpened just a little, and I could tell this was all part of her plan. When everyone had gathered, Emma stood at the front of the room, tapping her glass to get everyone's attention. Lucas stood beside her, smiling nervously, as Emma announced that she wanted to share a few words with everyone about their relationship and how grateful she was for the family's support. People cheered, raising their glasses, and Lucas looked like he was finally settling in, convinced that maybe this was just a normal celebration after all. Then, Emma launched into her speech, and things took a turn. She started by thanking everyone for being part of their lives, for supporting her and Lucas. Then, she shifted gears, sharing stories about the early days of their relationship, painting a picture of love, commitment, and sacrifice. But as she went on, her tone shifted subtly. She began talking about the importance of loyalty and honesty, about how devastating it is when someone you trust betrays you. Lucas's smile faded. His grip on his glass tightened, and he glanced around, probably wondering if anyone else was noticing the shift in Emma's words. But Emma didn't slow down. She looked him straight in the eyes as she said, "It's heartbreaking when someone who promised to be faithful turns out to be a liar." The room went silent. The guests looked confused, some whispering to each other, piecing things together. Then, she nodded toward the mistress, who was now pale and fidgeting. Emma said, "It's even worse when you find out that person is here, pretending to celebrate your love." The room exploded. Guests gasped, eyes darting between Lucas and the mistress. Lucas, now sweating, tried to stammer out a response, but Emma didn't give him the chance. She continued, calmly recounting the months she'd known about the affair, the heartbreak she'd endured, and how she'd made the decision to marry him only to expose the truth. Lucas's face turned red. He looked desperate, glancing around the room for support, but he found none. Our parents stared at him in horror, and extended family members shook their heads in disbelief. His mistress, unable to handle the stares, slipped out of the hall as quickly as she could, disappearing into the night. She didn't even try to defend herself. Some family members started confronting Lucas directly, voices raised, demanding explanations. He tried to say it was all a misunderstanding, that things had been complicated, but no one was buying it. Emma stood back, watching as the reality of his actions finally came crashing down on him. He was humiliated, completely isolated in a room full of people who had once looked up to him. After the initial shock, Emma took the microphone again, thanking everyone for listening and saying that this would be her last night as Lucas's wife. She'd decided to formally end things, and she made it clear that Lucas would no longer be depending on her financially either. People looked at her with sympathy, admiration even, as she wrapped up her speech and left Lucas standing alone in the center of the room. I caught up with Emma after the gathering, and she looked lighter, as if a huge weight had been lifted from her. She said she was ready to move on, to leave this chapter behind and focus on building a life for herself. Watching her walk away from all of it, I knew she'd come out of this stronger, with a newfound freedom that Lucas would never have. When Lucas finally pulled me aside, he tried to apologize, asking if I'd known and if there was any way to fix things. But I had nothing for him. I simply shrugged, telling him he'd brought it all on himself. He looked down, defeated, finally realizing just how much he'd lost. As for me, I felt a strange sense of closure. I'd watched everything unfold, and in the end, Emma had come out on top. She'd taken control of her life, and Lucas was left to deal with the consequences. I'd witnessed karma play out in real time, and it was hard not to feel satisfied. Emma later sent me a message, updating me on her plans to start fresh, free from all the hurt Lucas had caused. She was ready to move on, and she even joked about updating me if Lucas's life continued to unravel. With everything wrapped up, I signed off, letting everyone know that while this chapter was over, there was always a chance Lucas's karma might come back around.